What's up, scholars? Welcome to Geometry Semester 2 online. My name is Miss Ekin, and I will be your host for this evening's festivities. We're going to talk about parallelograms. Parallelograms have a lot to do with parallel lines. What do you know? So to talk about parallelograms, we're actually going to make a family tree. Parallelograms came from Grandma Quadrilateral. Now, Grandma Quadrilateral has on, as my grandma calls her, 4 eyes, because all quadrilaterals have 4 sides. Anything that has 4 sides is a quadrilateral. So says Grandma Quadrilateral. Now, parallelograms came from Grandma Quadrilateral, so they have 4 sides. And we got parallelogram Paul. Now there's a lot of really cool things about parallelogram Paul. Parallelogram Paul, because he's a quadrilateral, he has 4 sides. But because he's a parallelogram, he's got some additional things, just like kids have more stuff, more features than just what they got from their parents. So not only does he have 4 sides, but his opposite sides are parallel. That's what these arrows mean. Opposite sides are parallel. Whoops, the S goes over here. Opposite sides are parallel. Not only are opposite sides parallel and he has 4 sides, but the opposite sides are congruent. Additionally, opposite angles are congruent. These 2 angles have 1 arc, these 2 angles have 2 arcs, so opposite angles are congruent. The diagonals of parallelogram Paul, meaning the lines that go from one corner to another corner that's not right next to it, those diagonals bisect each other. So that means from here to here would be the same distance as from the center to here. And similarly, from this side, from there to that center, would be the same distance as from that center to the opposite corner. So the diagonals, those lines, split each other in half. They bisect each other. Diagonals bisect each other. And then here we have consecutive angles, angles that are right next to each other. This angle is x degrees, this angle is y degrees. These consecutive angles are always going to be supplementary. X plus y will always equal 180 degrees. So parallelogram Paul has all 5 of these things true, and he's got 4 sides from his grandma. Now, parallelogram Paul had 2 kids, Rectangle Ralph and Rhonda the Rhombus. Okay, so these kids inherited everything that their dad had, who inherited everything that his grandma had. So, Rectangle Ralph not only has 4 sides, opposite sides parallel, opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, diagonals that bisect each other, and consecutive angles that are supplementary, but Rectangle Ralph also has all of his angles are equal to each other, and they are all right angles. That's actually what the word rectangle means. Rect means right. So all of the angles of Rectangle Ralph, every angle in a rectangle is 90 degrees. All angles are 90 degrees. So let's give them some right angles in there. All of these angles, every single one of them, covered in right angles. Now, Rhonda the Rhombus, a little different. Rhonda the Rhombus, however, has has 4 sides. Opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, diagonals that bisect each other, and consecutive angles that are supplementary. In addition to that, all of the sides of a rhombus are congruent. All sides are congruent. So we should really say over here that a rectangle has all angles that are 90 degrees, and thus, though they are all congruent, they're all the same measure, they're congruent. Rectangle has all angles congruent. Rhombus has all sides congruent. Alright, so Rectangle Ralph and Rhonda the Rhombus decide that they want to get a cat, and they're going to teach that cat everything they know about everything, and transfer all of their skills and knowledge and properties as well. So, together they make Square Cat. Square Cat has the congruent angles of Rectangle Ralph, the congruent sides of Rhonda the Rhombus, all the things from Parallelogram Paul, and of course has 4 sides. Alright, so a lot of your questions are going to be asking you, do figures fit into one of these categories? Or if they are one category, are they also another category? So let's think about this for a second. Since every generation gives all of its properties to the next generation, and these 2 kids give all their properties to their cat, is a square a rectangle? Does a square have all 90-degree angles? Yes, it does. So a square is a rectangle. A square is also a rhombus because all of its sides are congruent. A square is also a parallelogram because its opposite sides are parallel, its opposite sides are congruent, obviously if they're all congruent, its opposite angles are congruent, obviously if all of them are 90, when they're all congruent, then its opposite angles are congruent, its diagonals bisect each other, and its consecutive angles are supplementary. It's all true. Cool. And obviously it has 4 sides. That's what that is. A rectangle is also a parallelogram and a quadrilateral. A rhombus is also a parallelogram and a quadrilateral. The kids actually each have one more property I forgot to mention. So rectangle Randy, not only all of the angles are congruent, but also the diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. The diagonals are congruent. Diagonals are congruent. So not only do they bisect each other, but the whole diagonal is congruent. And in a rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. So they still bisect each other, they're still parallelograms, but they are also perpendicular to each other. So they also meet at right angles. The diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, cool. There's another thing I want to talk about that might come up, that we need to remember something from first semester of geometry. If you have alternate interior angles that are congruent, if you have congruent alternate interior angles, then you have parallel lines. So for example, if we have this picture with a quadrilateral, okay, that has the alternate interior angles here that are congruent, that means these lines are parallel. That'll be important if we're trying to prove that something is a parallelogram, because we might need to show that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. And we might have to do that from using the alternate interior angles that are congruent. So if you have alternate interior angles that are congruent, then you have parallel lines. And finally, there's actually one other property of Paul the parallelogram that you could use to prove that a quadrilateral was a parallelogram. If one pair of sides is congruent and parallel, then it is also a parallelogram. So if any of these 6 things are true, just one of them are true, if any of them are true, then they're all true, and the shape is a parallelogram. So remember, every generation gives all of its properties to the next generation. The 2 kids take care of the cat, which has all of these properties. And should you ever see congruent alternate interior angles, then you've got some parallel lines to work with. All right, scholars, that's it. I love you. I will see you next time. Keep on that hustle.